Welcome, everyone. I'm Hani Mamasani. I'm director of the Northwestern University Transportation Center and also director of the Telemobility UTC, which is a U.S. Department of Transportation supported Center of Excellence, which is a partnership between Northwestern, UC Berkeley, and University of Texas at Austin. The Telemobility Center, of course, is the main focus of the Telemobility Center is to look at the impacts of communication, information technologies on travel demand and activity patterns. We've had a particular focus on the impact of COVID-19, which has sent many of us working remotely and, of course, engaging more extensively in remote activities. And today we have the fifth in a series of telemobility virtual roundtables dealing today with telework and return to the office and the impact that is going to have on travel demand. Of course, this is a complex problem. It involves many actors, many stakeholders, and the focus that we're taking today is more from the standpoint of what are employers doing, particularly what are they doing in terms of office location and what changes are happening in the marketplace in that regard. And to address this, we have two outstanding experts to talk to us today. We have Sheila Botting, who is principal and president for America's Professional Services at Avison Young, where she leads the America's Professional Services practice and is a member of Avison Young's global real estate executive. Throughout her executive real estate career, she's led a number of multidisciplinary real estate teams and assignments across the industry with owners, investors, and corporate occupiers alike. And she's also worked on a transit-oriented development, which is particularly relevant to some of the questions that we are asking today about return to work and impacts for urban mobility. We also have Richard Monopoli, who is Vice President for Development at Boston Properties, where he has led land acquisitions, dispositions, complex deal structures, and discretionary entitlement processes in the two largest regions for Boston Properties. And again, he comes to us from the trenches, essentially, of how the development world is reacting and interacting with companies regarding office location and work arrangements. To lead us off and to moderate this event, I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Susan Shaheen from UC Berkeley. Susan is known to all of us in the transportation world as a pioneer in future mobility strategies and an internationally recognized expert in mobility and the sharing economy. At Berkeley, she co-directs the Transportation Sustainability Research Center of the Institute of Transportation Studies. She is also the chairperson of the Transportation Research Board. So Susan, I'll turn it over to you. Just one more announcement to all our attendees, and we have a very significant number today. Please feel free to ask questions. In fact, we encourage you to ask questions. The mechanism for that is to use the Q&A box. So if you look on your Zoom platform, you will find Q&A. Please write your questions. I will be moderating the Q&A box and we will be, again, addressing as many of these with our panelists after the initial round of questions that Susan will be putting to them. So with that, Susan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hani, and I'm delighted to be part of this University Transportation Center that's focused on telemobility. I think this particular panel is so timely as we start to think about coming back from COVID and emerging in terms of the workplace. So I have prepared a number of questions, Sheila and Rich, for both of you. The first thing I think would be fun to talk about is the future of work and return to work. And we're really curious, are you finding that employers you work with are taking a wait and see approach to their return from work strategies, or are they making less clear commitments? Or more clear commitments rather. Are we getting a more clear picture of what's going to happen, or more wait and see? And does that matter based on region of the US?
Rich, do you want to go ahead? You can do it from a New York perspective.
I'll give you the, yeah, sure thing. I'll give you the Manhattan perspective. I focus solely on development in our Manhattan office and kind of oversee our Manhattan development activities here. But we have a presence across the country. We have 55 million square feet of office space owned and operated in Boston, San Francisco, LA, DC, and New York. So we have a perspective across the spectrum from our financial tenants, the banks, our professional services, the consultants, the attorneys, and also, the TAMI and the tech tenants. And I would suggest that they are taking a wait and see approach. And that's evidenced by, the number of leases being signed or renegotiated right now in our portfolio. It's evidenced by the dollars, the capital expenditures related to people's spaces. For example, the second and third quarter last year, there was a lot of hubbub about the 6-foot office. How can we spread out in the office and create the space that people need and the distancing people need? And you would have expected, had people been jumping all over this, you would have expected capital to be expended to reposition their office spaces to reflect that new paradigm. They're not spending that capital right now. They're absolutely taking a wait and see approach. In fact, from the service side, and I'd love to hear from Sheila on this, on the services side, we're hearing from some of our vendors, some of the key architects in the marketplace are being queried right now as to what does return to work look like, and how can the physical spaces reflect the new requirements. So now they're just starting to do that homework. So it has been this entire year since it started March last year has been a wait and see approach for sure, for sure.
So I might take a little bit different spin on that. I work with corporate occupiers every day. Before COVID, probably did a couple 100 million square feet of space strategy for major occupiers. And what I would say is that before COVID, the way we worked was already changing. Technology was changing how and where we work. We weren't shuffling paper from the left to the right of our desks. Because of that, the average office seat in North America was empty 50% of the time, which means that for the occupiers, people weren't sitting in their seats. They were moving around. They're going downstairs to Starbucks or coffee or lunch or whatever and collaborating in their teams. And so when you're an occupier and you're sitting on a 50% vacancy rate, you're saying that that's a problem. So that was happening before COVID. Then COVID came along, and it's like somebody took all the cards, threw them up in the air, and they said, where are these going to land? What does that look like? And so everybody is taking a different view toward, how they envision the future of work, future of the worker, and then the future of the workplace itself. And so when you imagine what the future of the workplace is, it's really all about the war for talent. There's a wonderful consulting group called the Leesman organization that looks at surveys throughout the entire COVID experience. And I was on a panel with their chief researcher last week, and she was saying that only 15% of the employees surveyed around the world, of 200,000 employees, 15% of them said they wanted to go back to work full time, which means they wanted to return to the office full time, which means we're now in the largest change management exercise in the globe. People understand that, geez, I can work from home a couple days a week. I don't need to jump on a train or a subway or whatever, or an airplane to go to work. I can be here 1 or 2 or 3 days a week and then go to work wherever that is the other time. People are empowered. And given that it's about the war for talent, organizations and businesses have to pivot to make sure they embrace that war for talent and then adjust their real estate portfolio accordingly. But one size does not fit all. Every organization will take a different view to that topic, but I think it's a tremendous opportunity for us.
That's fascinating, Sheila. The next question I wanted to ask is about balance. So how are you seeing the balance of remote work versus return to the office in terms of your clients and company plans? Are any moving forward in significant portions of their workforce to a permanent remote work, or will it be smaller fractions? You know, how do we balance all of this with office space? Does it ultimately become a perk to be able to work from home just a few days a month? How are employers thinking about this? We've seen some major announcements from Google that suggest that they're less inclined to allow people to work from home in a more permanent basis. They're seeming to signal that they want to come back.
So I think the issue is, what is the purpose of the office? What is the value of the office? And so the onus is therefore on building owners, investors to come up with really great, wonderful buildings and places as into a placemaking opportunity for the building. And then for the employer to build out their offices, to be able to drive a high performance workforce, to be able to collaborate. I think that the day of the cube farm is long gone, and we have to reimagine what the art of the possible is for the workplace and create these magnificent new work environments that people will want to be at, to collaborate, to get together, to engage like a university campus, right? It becomes a completely different purpose. And so you don't need to do that 5 days a week, 9 to 5. You can do that 3 days a week, or whatever it is that is appropriate for your organization. Because of that, employers will then modify their flex work strategies. But if you create these really cool offices, really cool workplaces, the research says that people will actually go there more often. So I think the onus is on the development community and on the employers to create these incredible environments.
No doubt about it. I think that was an important announcement from Google. It was important for us. And, as an owner of Class A office space, we want to see people come back. We want to see people use our product. And in that sense, I live in a little bit of an echo chamber because I talk to a lot of other office owners. But it was important for us to hear, and Google's a client of ours in Cambridge. It was important for us to hear that. And just knowing how they think and function and do research with respect to teams and team performance. I'm not sure there's a company out there that does as much research into the effectiveness of teams than Google does. So the composition of teams, the effectiveness of teams, the output of teams, they cover that with extraordinary detail. So what they're signaling is it's important for them to be in person for their teams to be functioning effectively to drive value creation for the company. That's an important message, knowing what we know about how the research that they do. The other couple of signals that I would point out, Facebook, even in the middle of the pandemic in June of last year, and this is Manhattan news, they signed an important 700,000 square foot lease at the Farley building. And not only does that signal the need for in-person work, this was all while they were remote. They went ahead and signed that lease, knowing that it's important to bring people back. And to Sheila's point, that is one of the coolest spaces in Manhattan right now. It is fantastic space, lots of outdoor space. It's almost a horizontal campus in Manhattan. Very difficult to replicate, but one of our competitors, Tornado, did a wonderful job on that project. And then last week, Facebook signed another 300,000 square foot expansion in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So they continue to signal that office space and the ability to be together is important to them, even amidst what's going on and what's been going on for 13 months. So we're bullish about return to work. I do think it is going to become a perk, and the mode split, call it, between work from anywhere and work in the office is going to shift. There's no doubt. But that comes at some kind of a price. And I know that companies are querying their teams right now. Would you like to work 1, 2, 3, 4 days remote? That's the first set of questions. And then would you change your answer if you did not have a permanent location in the office, if you were only going to be there less than 3 days? You'd lose your space. You would have to hotel or otherwise. Mm-hmm. Would you change your answer? And some people do, some people don't. That's personal preference, but that's been very informative for us to kind of hear the results of some of those surveys, and they're ongoing. And I'm sure, Sheila, you've been asked to do a lot of those by your clients, I would suspect.
Yes. The other layer that's really important, that one size does not fit all, right? So when you work with an employer or an organization, you have to figure out what the nature of the work is that the people are doing. So if they're doing heads down work or, talking to a screen all day, as we all seem to be doing, they don't need to necessarily be with a group of other people to do that. So you may choose to do your heads down work 1 or 2 days a week from home, or if you're doing research or whatever it is that you're doing. And then when you need to collaborate, scheduling how to do that in the office. But it goes back to the notion that we have to be really, we have to understand what it is that our people are doing, how they're doing it, and then what is the right work environment for them to be able to perform that. Now, not everybody's going to want to go home. As I did some work in Asia, what I learned was that some of the offices there were in fact places where people wanted to go to all the time because that was very much part of the culture. So again, it goes back to one size does not fit all and coming up with the right solution based on individual work styles, the nature of work that needs to get done, and then the last office design. I'm still wildly bullish on the office building and the office market, but we're going to go through this pause in the market as people recalibrate. The other part of this that for employers, as we work with employers, the business case is actually pretty simple. You say, in your office space before COVID, the average seat was empty 50% of the time for whatever reason. Now we're into this COVID environment, your leases are coming up for renewal, or you have to think about them. Footprint reduction is a tremendous opportunity to align your cost structure. And so that was an opportunity before COVID. So they can reduce their footprint by 10, 20, 30% and use those savings to redeploy back into their people or back into technology. So it becomes productivity enabling or profitability a focus as opposed to just empty office space. So that pivot is a tremendous opportunity for the companies across North America and certainly the globe. And that's been a trend, again, that was taking place before COVID. It does mean that the future of our office environment will need to embrace those changes, and things never stay the same. So it's important to understand that.
So one of the things, Sheila, you said at the beginning of this question was the era of the cube farm is gone. I love that. If I could tweet that out right now, I would. It's wonderful, and I love the idea of re-envisioning the workspace and making it a really cool environment. That I think is really inspiring. As we think about this, future of work, what does it look like? I was never a big fan of the cube farms myself. I think that's why I became an academic. Never liked it.
The cube farm has been undergoing kind of a slow death for a long time, but this has been going on for a while, as Sheila pointed out. Back in 2007, when they invented the iPhone, and with a very kind of strong Wi-Fi deployment across the United States, we had the beginning of what we call the untethered workforce. And you were no longer tethered to the cube. You were no longer tethered to much of anything. And then we saw the emergence of what we call work from anywhere, WFA. So work from anywhere had a strong influence on how people use their space. And in fact, how space was designed and presented itself. The design community, when you became, as an untethered worker, when you became accustomed to sitting in a cafe or sitting on a couch in a hotel lobby or sitting wherever you wanted to work, those design influences have now completely permeated how people look at the design of office, the design of core and shell. What core and shell is our lobbies, the big lobbies that we provide as a landlord, have to be reflective of the design influences from the untethered workforce. So our lobbies are beginning to feel a lot more like hospitality-driven lobbies. They do feel much more like we're gathering people to come and relax and have a coffee, etc. The era of the cold marble mausoleum lobby on Park Avenue is kind of over. And you're seeing activated lobbies that allow you to go down and meet a colleague for a coffee and spend a little time downstairs and then go upstairs. But the burden is on, Sheila's right, the burden is on the landlord to provide activated common areas such that tenants can they don't have to replicate these spaces in their own leasable square footage. We do it for them. It's kind of part of the package of amenities that we provide. So we grade ourselves on that. So we have just a little framework called location, place, and space. and we give ourselves a grade on all of those aspects. And if we're not getting high grades on all of them, we have to pull some kind of lever. Usually involves deploying capital. The hardest thing to change is your location. A sense of place is changeable with quite a bit of effort. And then maximizing great space is probably the easiest thing to modify. So Sheila's right. It's the onus is on the landlord to provide the impetus to bring people back and support what the essential function of office space, which is that collaboration and innovation. You can do head down work at home, and people have been doing that, and they're craving the innovation and the experiences that they can do together.
Can I layer on top of this, Susan? Because I want to build on the cube farm and share what doesn't work. Just
Okay.
to dispel the myth of the cube farm, because these things are literally right across North America. So think of the standard office floor plate, where all around the outside you've got all kinds of private offices. The corners have the biggest offices for the biggest egos typically. Those offices are awarded based on tenure and or seniority and or whatever. Inside the middle are all the cubes for the worker bees who never get to see the light of day typically. There might be dreadful coffee in the middle, and that's called the collaboration area. And so that type of floor plate is completely going the way of the dodo bird. That floor plate is long gone. 10 years ago, people then moved to open plan. Let's put everybody into this open space. Well, that didn't work either. What they found is people put headsets on and then they would send each other emails, even though they're next door to each other. So neither one of those work. And so we're now coming up with these dynamic office environments that blend the, little bit of heads down space, a lot of collaboration space, a lot of meeting spaces, a lot of agile places, cafes, meeting rooms, bistros, the whole enchilada in terms of what it can become. And so you combine that with the building and having these magnificent activated spaces, then you've got a value proposition that people say, I do want to go to work. There's a purpose for me to be there during the day. It'll be cool to be with my friends, to collaborate with Bob, Sally, and Sue, because we've got to get XYZ project done. But you won't be inclined to go back to work if you're going to a cube farm. And oh, by the way, in the Netherlands, this right to light is very much part of their building code, whereas we don't have that necessarily in the North American market. And so that's why everybody's been pivoting to, I guess, the democratization of space. Just because I have a title doesn't mean I deserve the big ego corner office. And so there's a tremendous opportunity there. There's a movement toward unassigned seating so that when you do go into the office 2 or 3 days a week, you can easily plunk down to Rich's point, on a sofa, in a cafe, or whatever. But it's just changing the entire conversation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was curious, I wanted to ask you both, you've both talked a lot about like activated space, agile space. Do we know from a performance measure standpoint that pays off? Do employers measure that, or do developers measure that? How does that work?
So I'll start with the occupier. So I'll share with you, about 10 years ago, I traveled to Australia and saw Macquarie, Commonwealth, and National Australia Bank. So if anybody's been to those spaces, they're incredible. And they're really the leaders in this unassigned activated spaces globally. And so we met with their folks, and they said that 96% of people would never go back to the dark ages of the cube farm that I described previously. And so you said, that's pretty cool. Like, what did it do to your productivity? And sure enough, the productivity improvements were there. So I worked on a number of those projects in our markets. And sure enough, the productivity goes up. It could be anywhere from 5 to 10% for some organizations. Absenteeism goes away. And so there's all these tremendous benefits that can come out of these activated spaces and the investment. And remember, for the occupier, so if I'm negotiating with Rich and I'm going into his building and I've got 100,000 square feet, I'm amortizing the cost of that leasehold improvement over the term of the lease, right? So it's not like I've got to pay for it all up front. The math actually works out because I'm going to take a little bit less space, use the money into the design, and have a phenomenal experience in one of Rich's buildings. And so it's a win-win right across the board.
And Sheila mentioned it, it's real estate in your space, in great space and place, have become a tool to attract, retain, and develop talent, right? And when we do tours with companies 15 years ago, It was about how close is this to the CEO's house, and what does the CEO's, commute time feel like?
Yeah.
And then, 7 to 10 years ago, the head of HR began to show up on tours. And the head of HR was having a really a really important influence on the space and location decision, because they said that it was important for these companies to show their talent that when you come to work with us, you're going to get access to all of this, and it needs to feel great. And so when it became a lever for attracting, retaining, and developing talent, that was clear to us how important, and that doesn't directly translate into your question, which is what are the productivity metrics, which as a landlord, we're not privy to, but seeing the head of HR showing up on tours and having an incredible influence in the decision was important to us. And then we saw how important that was.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating.
I'll do a yes and. So the reason the HR person is there, when you think about it, these organizations are transforming from a very traditional way of working to using digital to embed in their workforces, right? So now the organization have to go through transformation themselves, because we're moving to the digital economy, the fourth industrial revolution, and all that other, information. So they're transforming. So the right organizations have a chief transformation officer. Often the HR person is either at the table or performs that same role and says, we can use our workplace and our physical environment to drive that change and transformation. So it becomes much more than just the box of the real estate. It becomes a whole organizational opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, I wanted to shift our conversation just a little bit towards land use and land use management, because we've heard a lot about people changing where they live because of work from home policies during COVID. And I think we were curious to see if companies are thinking about shifting from those city locations like San Francisco nearby where I live to more suburban cities. Are you seeing that? Moving the employment to where the workers might have moved?
So the answer is yes. And I think they've always been doing that. So think about, again, I go back on one extreme. The old days was the traditional model, go downtown, work 9 to 5. Today, we're all distributed, where some of us are in lockdown, some of us aren't, but we're all distributed. So now our employers are saying, where do we land at the end of the day? So it could be a hub and spoke model, that they might keep their downtown hub and put a spoke, I'm making this up, from San Francisco to Nashville, or to, there's been a huge movement to Florida as part of that spoke as well. So there's many different places on what that looks like. Or they may keep their hub and allow people to work remote. I think it goes back to the philosophy that one size does not fit all. So any organization can move. What the employers that we're working with are really wrestling with is, do we, require that our employees live somewhere in proximity to the office so that they have to be in the office 2, 3, 4 days a week? That's really the number one question. Or are they happy that they live in Nashville, wherever, right, in order to do their work?
Rich, any thoughts on that?
We have in most of our regions, we have both a CBD presence and a suburban presence. So in Boston, we're in Back Bay, and then we're also in Waltham on 128. In DC, we're in the district, and we're also in Reston. So in our own portfolio, we haven't seen much yet. We've had one inquiry from one of our anchor tenants in Boston that they get a small 7,000 to 10,000 square feet. But I do think it's early days. People are trying to sift through what the issues are. I'd point out that the sorting of, kind of the people that need to be in our product is usually the highest cost product in these markets on a per square foot basis. The sorting of who needs to be there and who doesn't, who needs to be on Park Avenue and who can sit in Jersey City, that sorting's been going on for 20 years. So they've already made a determination that these people are important enough to pay $120, $130 a square foot to be at the GM building on Fifth Avenue. So from our client base and our view, I think we're probably going to see a little less of our clientele going through the hub and spoke. But it is a trend, and we're something we're monitoring closely for sure.
Mm-hmm. And then, is there a silver lining, for example, for companies that couldn't afford to be in a CBD? Now that we're seeing lower rents in a lot of those locations, is there a silver lining? Are you seeing somebody wanting to actually take advantage of that occupancy that's now there?
For sure. The premise of Mort Zuckerman and Ed Lindy founded this company in 1972 and 71. And he said, if we own the best assets, the best locations, and the best markets, even during a downturn, we will see a flight to quality. And that, we've been through many, many cycles as a 50-year-old company. Even in the downturn, we see flight to quality. The tours, the number of leasing tours that we've been running on Park Avenue, in particular Park and the GM building here in Manhattan, have doubled since relative to the first quarter of 2019. People are saying, I want to be in the city. I want to be on Park Avenue. I couldn't get in there before. And we're seeing, it's not a falling knife in terms of rents, but there's a COVID discount in terms of rents, right? And people, it's a flight to quality that's actually happening. We have real evidence of that.
Sheila, are you seeing anybody wanting to flock back to the city or get into the city who wasn't there before?
So as a general theme, yes. But there's different ways they can do that. The other piece that we haven't really talked about yet is the flex office piece, right? So some folks may say, I'm happy to have a flex office scenario, whether it's downtown or the suburban markets, and that I think you'll see more and more of that as we emerge from this challenge.
Mm-hmm.
That's an important piece of the puzzle. And, we're all watching the Hulu WeWork documentary that just came out.
Right. I was just going to ask you about that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And BXP is certainly, we've done some deals with WeWork. They're an interesting company. That was an interesting trend. That's not going away. I think if you look at the average lease term of our portfolio, it's about 8.2 years. We have, on average, long lease durations. And that actually grew from high 7s to 8.2 over the last 3 to 5 years. So people still need that anchor space. They need that place to be. But I think as a landlord now, we talked about the activated lobby, right? And kind of bringing that hospitality feel. I think as a landlord, we also need to complement our offerings with some kind of, call it space as a service, where you've got a 400,000 square foot anchor with a 15, 20-year lease, and then they can flex in and out of space, maybe on a quarterly basis. They can take 20 seats, 30 seats, project level basis in the same building that's offered by the landlord on flexible terms. I think post-pandemic, that was already there pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic, it's going to become even more important, I think, for us as landlords to contemplate that and make those offerings as part of our amenity package.
And remember, it's all about the war for talent, right? That's the secret sauce that everybody wants. If you think about the digital economy, it's all about the digital natives, the younger generation, the war for talent, embedding them with experienced people. So I'm not suggesting one population or another, but it's about all 5 generations working together. So in that war for talent, as an occupier, you have to be able to provide solutions to attract and retain the brightest and the best to work at your XYZ company, whatever that looks like. So whether you're now in the suburbs and you want to stay in the suburbs because chances are most of your working population is there, or whether it's downtown. But just to build on what Rich was saying, the activation, the focus on hospitality, that becomes everything. So right inside the workplace, so whether you have a concierge kind of, call it 411 service, so that you can deal with people's dry cleaning, shoe repair, copying, reservations, whatever that is, but that concierge service right through to wellness centers becomes one whole value proposition right through to the building itself. And obviously the scale of the organization will help to determine how much they scale up or scale down. But the human experience, what does that look like? And I would argue that flows right through to the transportation sector as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Threading that needle over to transportation, I think, is really important because transportation is part of the wellness of the employee, particularly if they're very far away from their work. So we've seen in the Bay Area just so much focus on the transportation options that are provided to attract employees, like, you know, the famous Google shuttles, right, Rich?
Yeah. You know, it's important. It's funny how people think, oh, paradigm shift. Paradigm shift, it's never going to be the same. With the rise of Uber and the rise of micro mobility, whether it be Bird and scooters or whatever, people pre-pandemic had thought that location had become kind of decoupled from access to transportation. Like, well, of course that you can build an office building in the middle of nowhere in Brooklyn. You can get there on an Uber or Lyft. The company will have a contract with Lyft. What we're finding now, post-pandemic, it is more important than ever to have access to transportation and be a near transportation hub, and kind of minimize the modality of people are not going to be comfortable, at least in the short term. This may revert to the mean, but in Manhattan, there was a flight to Westchester in terms of residences. A lot of people that were going to move to Westchester in the 3 to 5 years in the future accelerated that and left the city. Now they're riding Metro North, which is the commuter rail into Grand Central. They would much prefer not to get on another subway and take the subway downtown. There's going to be a resurgence of the importance of the surroundings of Grand Central for that one mode of transportation trip to work. So it was looking back and thinking about some of the conversations we had about location doesn't matter anymore because Uber can get you there. It absolutely matters more than ever post-pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think the role of transportation is something that we've been talking a lot about in our UTC Telemobility Center, and thinking about different scenarios. We are seeing that a lot of people have gone out and acquired vehicles. So vehicle registrations have gone up. And so a lot of us have been wondering how well are people going to come back to shared forms of transportation, like public transit, or even a shared Uber or Lyft? Are people going to be less inclined to carpool and vanpool because of fears around a pandemic or virus transmission? And so it's interesting to hear you talk about this, Rich, that you think that there's more of a coupling with mass transportation in terms of proximity of developments. How do you see this playing out with the virus and some of these trends that we're tracking?
I do think it's all about vaccinations. We're in COVID jail, and when people get that second vaccination and they're 2 weeks out, it's like getting out of jail. You're getting out of jail. It's the jailbreak, and you can sense it in their tone and the sense of freedom that comes with the second shot. It remains to be seen how many people are going to be comfortable riding the train. But I do think there's a different vibe, particularly in Manhattan. And it's an acute issue in Manhattan because we so heavily rely on public transit to get in and out of the city. This is not a driving city. So it remains to be seen how many people are going to be comfortable on the commuter rail versus the subway. The subway, just by its nature, feels different, feels a little more close, a little less ventilated than the commuter rails, which are above ground for the most part. So we're seeing a return. I ride the train every day. I've been back at work since June 29th last summer, when Governor Cuomo allowed non-essential workers to come back. It's picking up. The population in our buildings has gone from a low of, this was like 3% populated relative to a base of January of 20. We're back up to 18% now, which is a new high, and it continues. The energy this past week, the energy in the city has been very strong. We can sense it in Midtown, and we hit these new highs of 18%, and it's all about the vaccinations. So I think it's going to feel more normal in the summer, and once we hit that 60-70% vaccinated level, I think people will be back and behave, kind of like a little bit like it was before.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that we have a mobility index, just to layer on to what you said, Rich. We actually track mobility data right across the major North American cities and European for that matter. And New York is at about 42% right now. So it's both the office workers and people moving back, the residential folks that are moving back. But I think that, and go back to my change management comment, that I think this is in everybody's psychology now. So jumping on a subway anytime soon or jumping on a train, I think people will be much more cautious because who knows if there's some other COVID-20 coming out. And so that's now, or COVID-21 or whatever it is, there's so many variants of this thing that I think that caution will be here in our minds for quite a while. So getting really close to others, I don't think is going to happen soon, depending on your own personal appetite for risk or whatever you think of whether this is a scare or not.
And one of the other major trends we've seen in mobility, and it sounds like you know a lot of our lingo because I'm hearing you drop words like micromobility. So I'm like, yeah, all right, you guys are on top of it. We've seen a lot of changes in appetites for active transportation since the pandemic. And so people have a desire to get around and take a scooter or a bike or walk more. How do you see that playing in potentially to the development patterns of employers?
Just anecdotally, there are folks in my office that live in Manhattan, and to Sheila's point, they're not comfortable getting in the subway. They'd ridden the 6th line north from the Lower East Side up to 53rd and Wax, where our office is. And she's riding a bike every day and absolutely loves it. And I think you're going to see, the continued increase in the use of City Bike. City Bike's kind of oversold at this point. I think it's a huge plus. And then the mayor and this administration has done a very good job in terms of creating safe bike lanes in the city. That's new, and it's been a real positive. So that is the alternative to riding the subway, and I don't think that's going to reverse itself.
What about you, Sheila? What are you thinking about active forms of mobility to get to work?
Totally agree. But I think it depends on the city and how open they are. But of course, having bike lanes and having a much more active population becomes really important. Hard to commute from distant suburbs into the city by cycling, which many of our folks do. So obviously adjusting for that. For me personally, I can't imagine jumping in my suit during the morning and then getting on a bike to go to work. Although when I was in Amsterdam, everybody did that every day. I don't know if we're ready for that in the snow states in North America.
So are we
missing more kind of landlord anecdote is everybody's demanding bike parking.
Yeah, exactly.
And as we lay out our amenity packages in new developments, we kind of look at existing buildings for repositioning. That's a big issue. Where are we going to allow for bike parking, whether it's self-park and make it comfortable, or kind of end of trip experiences? So it might be bike valet, but you have a fitness center where you could clean up and get ready for work. That is becoming a really high demand amenity in Manhattan. And in our other markets, in Boston and Cambridge as well.
So when we think about developers and their plans for the future of work, what other trends might be influencing their patterns that we haven't talked about? We haven't talked about electrification, and we're talking about a massive change in terms of that. What are you guys hearing about planning for the future?
One thing I've noted about what we're doing right now in technology and the influence of the virtual workplace and the overlap of the physical and the virtual workplace. We will admit and concede that Zoom has been amazing, and had this happened 20 years ago, the economy would have collapsed because we'd all be faxing each other papers all day long. But Zoom is in its infancy. These are new tools. What are these tools going to look like 7 to 10 years from now, or 15 years from now? And I forget, maybe it was Bill Gates or somebody said, we overestimate the impact in the short term and underestimate the impact in the long term. So what does the virtual workplace and its influence look like 10, 12, 15 years from now. I am not a futurist or a technologist, but I'd love to hear from one to see what is the future of Zoom and how does this continue to influence our space. It's something we need to, as developers, get our arms around.
The other big topic is, of course, around ESG, right? Environmental, social, and governance matters. So, environmental sustainability on buildings, whether or not you do the LEED status or some other certification, but that becomes really, really important in the development psyche, because of course, people are now caring about that. If 40% of the global CO2 emissions comes from buildings, how can we, when we're developing new buildings or retrofitting old buildings, address that? So that becomes a big topic. And then, of course, all of the social issues. And I talked about the design from the traditional cube farm into more of a democratic process for design, but that becomes a tremendous opportunity. And then how we operate our real estate companies is equally related to that.
I was going to ask you guys a question about social equity, because that's been something that's really become very front and center to discussions in public policy, discussions in transportation. Do you see changes in this direction to better accommodate potentially people that we're leaving behind? And I think about that in the context of things like telework, and how employers might be thinking about, lack of broadband and things like that related to social equity.
Okay, so easy solutions. So for many employers, what they would do is they would say, if you're going to work from home, what bundle of things do you need in your home environment, whether that's broadband or a desk, a chair, or whatever. And so many employers are saying, yes, we'll give you a package to be able to afford to do that. Yes, and then some folks, that's one example. Some people can't work at home. They may have, small children or whatever it is, so they need to be in the office. I think at the end of the day, for employers, it's about giving employees choice, right? Again, it goes back to, it's about the war for talent. It's empowering your employees, giving them choice to make their own decisions. Yes, they do need to be in the office to collaborate and get together, but it's about choice so that they can navigate their schedules to be able to get the things done that they need done. It's funny because it's about trust, and it's about, providing people with clear objectives, measurable outcomes, and then trusting them to get that done. Whole different psychology than having a job description watching you 9 to 5. And so as we move toward that new approach in the future of work, I think there'll be some bumps along the road, but that's literally where we're going. And I think that provides a greater opportunity for, the democratization, I think that's the right word, of how we work together.
As a developer, in thinking about ESG in the context of a public development company, we recognize our responsibility to use resources efficiently, effectively, and we have a tremendous portfolio of LEED Platinum buildings. We think carefully about how and where we develop, and we're always pushing the envelope with respect to energy use in particular. You mentioned electrification. We are certainly looking at all electric in the future, and all the implications of that, where we can do that effectively, where we can't. I think Manhattan, we just did a presentation on internally. Manhattan, as it moves to close the Indian Point nuclear plant and supplement that with renewable energy, some of it coming from Canada. There is a lot of, Canada happens to have an excess of hydro. And there's a very large power line coming down the Hudson to be terminated in Queens that we and other landlords could potentially tap into in 2024 when they throw a switch. So we're always pushing hard to do the right thing in terms of energy use. Where you can use energy RECs in the Boston region, we've purchased enough energy RECs from a wind farm in West Texas to cover all of our use. So we're pushing hard towards kind of the net zero vision over time and making capital improvements. And that's what our clients are asking for. That's part of the space decision now is what does your energy ESG footprint look like?
Mm-hmm. So carbon neutrality is moving right on into development. So that's
It absolutely is. And it's, you know, particularly in commercial office, it's difficult to achieve at the asset level. It's kind of a holistic solution. We rely on clean energy from the grid, which is, you know, a bit out of our control, but it's coming. It's coming over time.
Mhm. So just a final area of questioning that has, I think, to do with perceptions about society and the environment. When we look at vehicle miles traveled after the pandemic hit, we saw these crazy declines in vehicle miles traveled. And what we've been watching since a year ago is the ticking up of vehicle miles traveled, despite the fact that people are working from home. So we were curious, when you think about the future of work and employers and developers, do concerns about congestion and air quality and climate change factor into a company's decision-making process? And if so, how important are these issues?
So for an employer, they'll be measuring ESG, right? They'll be doing some level of reporting, increasingly so in the years ahead. So they'll measure, for example, they'll know where their employees live relative to the office. They'll know if they're taking public transit or a vehicle of some form, and they can actually run calculations to demonstrate their contributions to CO2 emissions declines. And so ESG becomes a really important factor that employers are monitoring and are very conscientious of. At the same time, if you were to choose an office building, supposing a lease came up and they said, am I going to building A, B, or C? And building C happens to be a LEED Platinum or some other type of building that offers better features and benefits, they would choose that any day of the week, providing the math works out for them. So I think increasingly employers are paying more attention, and certainly our industry is well in front of what that looks like. There is a little bit of a gap in the, I'll call it the facility management of the spaces inside buildings. So the occupier is now starting to look at, instead of giving out plastic bottles, for example, and you've seen some of those trends that are taking place. That's really the next major wave that I see across our industry. Lots of multiplier effects on that one.
Okay, so perhaps this is a good time to pivot into the more general questions. Thank you so much, Susan, for leading this discussion today. Very amazing insights that we heard today. So I kind of want to try to summarize a little bit what I think I heard. I think what we're looking at clearly is an acceleration of trends that existed pre-COVID in terms of the war for talent, in terms of creating these really cool spaces. And I think your opinion is now this is accelerating, just because if you're bringing back people to the office, you'd better have something good to make it worth their while to be there, since you could keep some employees at least part of the time at home. So in that sense, I think that would be an acceleration of that trend. When it comes to sort of central or CBD versus suburbs, what we're seeing though now is a reversal, I think, of the trends that we had before. I'm thinking Chicago, for example, for the past, like pre-COVID, for the past few years, every year we'd have announcements by companies like McDonald's that's moving from Oak Brook back into downtown Chicago. And similarly, we saw a lot of companies investing in their downtown offices, creating cool spaces downtown, because the young workers they wanted to attract wanted to live in the city. They didn't want to be in Schaumburg or Oak Brook or whatever, the further out suburbs. But what I'm hearing you say now is, in fact, the opposite is beginning to happen, that there is a reversal of that. Am I correct, or is this very much city specific?
If you're asking me, no, there's not a reversal. I think what corporate occupiers are doing is looking at their overall requirements from the future of work, the future of worker, and then where should our workplace go? And so many of them will, if they're downtown, they'll typically stay downtown. Let's face it, our public transportation networks are such that typically all of that flows downtown. So you can catch the largest employee population base from across that marketplace by having a downtown location. So the question is, do they want to supplement that with a suburban location, the hub and spoke model, whether it's suburban or whether it's another city somewhere? And that's something that folks have thought about. But again, that was taking place even before the pandemic, as people were putting up, different administration centers in the central US and other locations. So I don't think we can generalize and say everybody's going to the suburbs. Absolutely not. But I think you could say for the employee, well, geez, if I don't have to physically sit at my seat downtown from 9 to 5 every day, and I don't have to commute for an hour each way, that's giving me more housing choices. So I think you'll see an explosion, even more so within the suburban markets from a place to live perspective, and that may or may not influence the office location. That's my personal view. I don't know, Rich, if you have a different view on that one.
No, I agree. I don't think the 40-year, 50-year trend towards urbanization is going to be reversed. And again, I'm thinking about Manhattan multifamily, speaking with a colleague of mine, a multifamily developer owner, the bottom of the multifamily market in Manhattan was September of 20. A lot of occupancies dipped down to 70% on average, some worse. And some of those units are back above 90% now because people want to be in the city and they want to get a good lease deal in the city. So that's encouraging that they did not stick around at the 70% level of occupancy much longer than 2 or 3 months. So people are coming back. And then again, anecdotally, there's a real pent up, this feeling like you were in COVID jail. And when they get their vaccines, the city, there's a pent up energy in Manhattan that you could feel. The city is about to take off. And I think retail and restaurants and the service sectors are going to recover extraordinarily fast, faster than people anticipate. And we're talking about moving into the next roaring 20s. Now, I'm an optimist by nature. That's why I'm a developer. But we can sense it, and I think it's going to kind of unfold that way.
So, I'm a transportation modeler. I model transportation networks, and of course, we need to know where are the employers, right? I mean, and what kind of policies are they adopting, and so on. So, if I'm now trying to formulate scenarios for how a recovery might look like, I'm going to say there are going to be some companies that, like Google, for example, that announced pretty much everybody has to be back at work with a little bit of flexibility, 1 day a month. And if you want more than that, you have to request it. Then you have companies that are going to say, we're going to give you 1 day a week flexibility, and others that are going to say maybe 2 days a week flexibility. And there'll be some distribution of employers in terms of whether they fit in the 2 day, the 1 day, or the 0 day, essentially. If I'm looking at the impact of that on congestion, which is one of the areas that we look at typically, clearly, if I can go from 0 to 2, that's fantastic. That's relieving a lot of traffic, and congestion is a problem at the margin. In other words, if you could, reduce that peak, obviously that's going to be great. Now, my problem is if I tell employees you can take 2 days a week, and everybody chooses Monday and Friday, we have a problem, right? So if they spread that over the week, then we're good from a transportation standpoint. Is this something that I guess you've discussed at all with some of your employer clients?
Absolutely. And so the notion that people, work remotely on Fridays is probably that's a no-brainer, that particular one. And so the question is, from Monday through Thursday, which employees come in during which days of the week? Of course, as we return to office from COVID, one of the big requirements that our clients have is a technology platform to manage who's coming in at what day, so that we can make sure that we've accommodated the social distancing requirements. So that becomes a topic. Equally, if we want to go to an unassigned seating model, we also have to navigate who comes in what day of the week. And so what you'll see employers do if they choose to go down that path is they'll also want to equalize the days of their employees in during the week. But I suspect that Friday still will be a great day to be able to work remotely. Just because, especially during the summertime, right? Maybe in the winter it's a little bit different, but in the summertime, I suspect you'll see more of that.
It's a very civilized way to work. 4 days a week, stay home Friday. That's a nice lifestyle. One thing that you talk about transportation and all the issues related to horizontal transportation. We think about vertical transportation, particularly Manhattan. And these buildings that were designed in the 60s and 70s that we own that have a certain number of elevator banks. And how many people are we allowed? Are people comfortable riding in the elevator post-pandemic? And if we all rush back, are we going to be able to get them effectively into their floors with the number of the elevators and speed of elevator that we have? We haven't been tested on that yet. We were organized to receive people back. We assumed this was going to go 2 to 3 months, and we'd be back in May or June of 20. And we put up these stanchions. It looked like Disneyland with these winding stanchions, and such that we could queue people into the buildings. And people haven't been back yet in volumes necessary to really test our vertical transportation. But that's going to be interesting and challenging as people come back. We think post Labor Day, we're going to be back to those kind of 70% plus levels. And we'll see how we deal with vertical transportation on those heavy days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question from Krishnan Viswanathan from Cambridge Systematics, and a similar question also from Professor Kara Kuckelman from UT Austin. And it's directed first to Rich, but Sheila would like your opinion on that as well. Are any of your clients thinking of converting commercial properties to residential?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we were kicking this around last week about the management post 9/11 of commercial office space and the volume of space in downtown Manhattan. It was obviously severely impacted. Demand dissipated rapidly. And what the city and the state did with a program called 421G was they incented the conversion of Class B and C office space to residential. And, so Lower Manhattan now has a vibrant residential life with over 15,000 units created through that program. You may see an expansion of that program up north of 14th Street. They've been talking about it. I haven't seen anything definitive. But if I were a Class C, B, or C office owner and thinking about what to do, given where demand may or may not be in the future, it's something that people will contemplate for sure.
Thank you. Sheila, would you like to add anything to this?
Yes, absolutely, ditto. And the other conversion that you'll see might be some of the shopping centers, right? So we're seeing a lot of shopping centers transition to mixed use areas to put residential either on top of the mall or some significant portion of it being redeveloped. So I think the residential infill, either on conversion of buildings or vacant sites or large parking lots, you'll see absolutely that taking place.
Okay, thank you. So we have another question here from Ron Bonneau, and it's directed first to Sheila. You mentioned right to light in the Netherlands, and Ron would like you to perhaps expand upon this concept and follow up with that in terms of how sort of thinking in other places in Europe, possibly in Asia, compares to the rethinking that is taking place in the US about sort of the nature of office space and office work.
Okay, so I described the traditional cube farm and what that looks like, that there were entitlements around who had offices on the window, typically by seniority. And I think you'll see that go away so that everybody has access to daylight during the day. In fact, there's been a number of research studies that show that if you have access to daylight, whether you see the rain, the sun, the clouds, whatever, it can drive productivity by 13%. So that's been wonderful to be able to look outside during the day. You see beyond your cube and into something that shows you the outside. And so in fact, if you've heard of the Edge in Amsterdam by Deloitte, that was one of the leading, most sustainable, environmentally sensitive buildings in the world. And that was one of the guiding principles around that. Originally, I think it was about 10 years ago, they built that building. And so many have now started to embrace that. And I certainly think that in the Netherlands, Amsterdam in particular, with their, their cycling and their focus on the environmental quality, there's lots of lessons for us to learn from that marketplace. And now it goes back to the democratization of space. You'll see that enter, I think, into most of the new designs in North America.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Don't quote me on this, but I had heard that in some municipalities, there's a limitation as to the width of the building, maximum 90-foot width, such that light penetration is getting as far as 45 feet before you get to the center core. What we've done over the past 15 years, we've done it multiple times, is reclad buildings with more efficient envelopes, such that we can get more natural light. In a traditional 80s office building, the window band would have been 3 foot off the ground, 5 foot of vision glass, and then maybe a 9-foot ceiling thereafter. And what we can do by recladding buildings is not only achieve better energy efficiency, but allow more natural light to flow in. It is the best sales tool ever. And that's what everybody's seeking in terms of great space.
And the yes, and by the way, the offices, I'm sure you know this, but just to make sure we haven't avoided this topic, the offices move from the window onto the inside along the core. And rather than having somebody's office, i.e. with Sheila Botting's name on the door, you may have meeting room furniture so that when I do go to the office, I can use it. But when I'm not there, somebody else can use it. And so that really becomes an opportunity, whether they're an analyst or they're a big personality, everybody's able to use the different types of spaces. And therefore, everybody has access to daylight.
Mm-hmm. So we have another question from Raymond Hall, who asks, a purpose of the office is also to provide secure access to information, resources, and corporate assets. Have you noticed an increase in concern around security of remote worker activities?
Well, you just look at the explosion in the cybersecurity industry. I mean, that's gone nuts. So the answer is yes, yes, and yes. And even when you think about, and Rich, you probably know more about this than I do, but even the traders who, before had to be in a physically secure environment at their trading station downtown, pick any city name, with cameras all around them, watching them, making sure that they're secure. Now suddenly they're parachuted into their home locations and they have to worry about those same topics. So the explosion in cybersecurity, it's here to stay. It's not like we can put the genie back in the bottle. This whole plan is here to stay. So we just have to get on with it, so to speak.
Okay.
The trading community, which obviously is an outsized influence in our Manhattan portfolio, whether it be hedge funds or the bulge bracket banks or boutique funds or whomever, they have figured out how to trade from home, and they are SEC regulated as it pertains to security of data, et cetera. So I thought that was remarkable. And just again, anecdotally, one of my best friends, who's also a Kellogg grad, is a credit derivatives trader here in Larchmont, New York. And I didn't think they could figure it. And not that far after the stay-at-home lockdown, they were trading at home. And he actually says he loves it, which is not good for the office, but it's working.
So this is kind of going back to a topic we discussed earlier. It's from David Tomczyk from Pace Suburban Bus Company, which is our regional bus transportation provider in Greater Chicago. He asks, what do you see as future for suburban office campus environments, such as where the company owns acres of land, sea of parking, walking path, ponds, etc.? And will they be selling off portions of land? Will they sit on it? Will they sell it outright? What do you have any insight into that?
So it goes back to the corporate occupier looks at their overall footprint, right? And so they say, and I'm making the number up, supposing they have 1 million square feet of footprint, they look at that and they say, where do we want to be? Do we want to be in our corporate campus environment? And do we have 5 other leases related to that? They might release those 5 other leases and consolidate in those corporate campus. But again, it's hard to predict theoretically where footprint optimization will go for any one client. I think that every occupier will be very carefully going through their portfolio, especially with their flagship locations. Those flagship locations, which typically is a corporate campus, are often sacrosanct in what they might do. It's really this, the BCD locations, I think that they would probably release. That's my gut. There's no data analytics around that topic. That's just a thought on that.
Okay.
We own quite a bit of that product. and through the years have kind of trimmed the lesser locations and pruned the portfolio. So for example, Boston is a good example. We had owned something on 495, which is the outer ring road. We own quite a bit on 128, which is the inner ring road. And 128 clearly outperforms 495. We used to joke in 2005 and 6 that 495 was under demolished as it pertains to suburban office, because a lot of it was sitting vacant. But what we're seeing now is if it's not office leasing, there are other sectors that are, on the upswing. The life sciences and the need for lab space has really just completely overtaken the office market in suburban Boston and Cambridge. Yep. And the demand is real, and the life science companies are growing at a rapid clip, given where we are with the virus. And that was already a sector that was growing kind of relatively larger than the rest of the nation and the rest of the economy. That's not going to change. So the interesting thing about life science and lab is that you can't do science at home. You got to be in the lab space. So we think that's a really interesting trend, and we're trying to play in that market more frequently.
Thank you. So we have a question from Mark Cooper on something we discussed earlier about sort of the nature of work and how it differs between being in person versus remotely. And Mark asks, have there been any studies into team cohesiveness after everyone went virtual? Are we drawing down the emotional bank account, quotes, leveraging existing networks but not building new ones? And how has that impacted onboarding new employees and getting them into the company's culture? Has it weakened the attachment between employee and employer?
A loaded question. I have some data in front of me that I'll share with you. So again, Leesman's looked at 200 folks around the world. And so they would say that working from home, that people, 90% of people have access to their software and their applications. They have 85% access to information, and 83% of people said their home environment enabled them to work productively. And we all know that. But 65% said they don't feel connected to their colleagues in the same way. 69% weren't as connected to their organization. And 72% were not able to maintain a healthy work-life balance. So clearly this work from home experiment has some benefits, i.e. I can get my stuff done on my laptop, I can talk to all of you, I can be on a webinar, I'm good to go. But my earlier meeting was about doing a whiteboard session with 5 of my colleagues, executive across North America. I can't do that on a video screen, right? So you've actually physically got to be there in order to have that experience. And so wildly frustration in your COVID jail, as Rich calls it. It's really good. So I think that will give you some of the stats around what's out there with respect to the environment and the pressures that people are facing. Everybody's dying to get back to work, but I'm not going back 5 days a week, 9 to 5.
Mm-hmm. That need for affiliation with a group, with colleagues, with an organization is such a basic human need. People absolutely are drifting away, and you're seeing kind of reevaluating what is important to them as they drift away from their companies and make career changes and other things that maybe they wouldn't have contemplated had there not been COVID, and they feel detached. You can sense it, and I'm a big believer in the culture bank, and the culture bank is running out for a lot of these companies. We have to get together and make deposits instead of withdrawals.
Okay, thank you. So Brett Johnson had a question. Brett, you want to ask your question?
Let me turn on my light so people can see my face. Thanks again, Rich and Sheila. This has been a great conversation, and thank you, Susan, for moderating the first part of the session. The Chicago Area Regional Transportation Authority conducted a survey recently that indicated that 20% of riders are not going to return to transit. So I have a series of questions. I mean, it's not, it's easy to follow based on that. So I'm curious if you're seeing, have you seen similar surveys in New York or Toronto, and have the results been similar? And if so, or just based on the Chicago numbers, what are the implications for office space? Is there going to be a move potentially to distributed office space to pick up employees who don't want to travel in? Is there going to be a higher reliance on active transportation that Susan brought up earlier? Or do we just foresee that there may be a larger portion of employees who are going to continue to work from home post-pandemic? I don't know which one of you may want to try that first.
So what you've just said is, let's take all the cards, let's throw them up in the air, and we're going to predict where they're going to land. Over to you, Rich.
Exactly. Thanks for the toss over. I think that's right. We just don't know. Again, I'll go back to COVID jail. People are speaking and answering these questions from a position of, I won't say fear, but concern for their health. And until we have some, more vaccinations and a little bit of a track record of comfort that they can move about the world and not get sick because they've been vaccinated, I think they're answering these questions from a different position than they will answer them 6 to 9 months from now.
And remember the stat that I shared with you earlier of this global survey that was done of 200,000 people. Only 15% said that they would return to the office 4 to 5 days a week. The other 85%, they said they go anywhere from 1 to 3 days a week. So we will see a dramatic reduction in people, I think, using public transportation, at least for the short term, right? Define short or medium term, until we all come out of COVID jail. This trend is here to stay for a while.
Yeah. Okay, so we have one last question, and it's really not a telework question as much as it is a development question. That is a real estate development question. And it's from Elias Gordon, who asks, most development around Chicago seems to be billed as luxury development in a city which developed the affordable bungalow. Are there any big cities attempting middle income and non-luxury developments?
There are.
What does Manhattan say?
There are. It does come back to land market and land value and expectations from land sellers as to their value. Everyone wants to maximize value, particularly in Manhattan, where these pieces of dirt are often owned for generations and can, at the right piece of dirt, the right location, can fund all the expenses of 3 or 4 or 5 generations of family. So it is driven by extraordinarily high land prices. That's why people need to build and reach for higher yields in terms of meeting the market. The levers that municipalities and states are pulling, tax relief 421A in Manhattan for affordable components up to now 30% in Manhattan, are really important. And then other kind of mission-driven owners. I was just having a conversation with the Trinity Church in Manhattan owns a lot of land, as they have for the last 400 years. Part of their mission is deep affordability. And they're going to put their assets to use on that front. So I think it's going to be a combination of solutions.
So I live in Toronto, and I think we've got some of the largest number of high density units built across North America, an average of 15,000 units a year over the last decade. And so as we build those units, having access to public transportation becomes absolutely everything. And so the outer suburbs, of course, are more affordable than those that would be downtown, but having a mix of units is very, very important. And in fact, in some of the municipalities in our region, they've said you must have up to 10% or 20% of affordable units relative to the average house price within that market. At the same time, many public sector organizations are donating their land for free to be able to create all kinds of new units. And so the city of Toronto, I forget, there's something like 15,000 new units that they've targeted to be able to build, to be able to address the affordability topic, whether it's deep affordability or right through to the, the digital native that needs to find an apartment for rent downtown in the city. So I think it's about the whole continuum of housing and being able to offer, again, it goes back to choice for people. And so being able to make sure that the market delivers on that choice.
Thank you. So, Susan, I'm going to turn it back over to you. You've been asking the questions, but you, of course, yourself you're an expert in this area. So I'd like to perhaps get your take on this topic today, and maybe give us a little summary and interpretation based on what you heard. And then after that, we'll turn it back over to our two panelists for their closing statements.
Thanks so much, Hani. And I wanted to thank Sheila and Rich for this incredibly insightful discussion. It's so right up my alley at this point. I am trying to develop some scenarios actually for Hani and other modelers to put together. And we've been scratching our heads trying to figure out following trends. What's going to stick is something we keep asking ourselves. So we were definitely peppering you strategically with questions to help our research, just so you know. and I definitely heard that there were a lot of trends. I heard you say this too, Hani. There were a lot of trends that were already in place that are getting reinforced, and some new things that we didn't see before. And so the other thing that I heard was that we still don't know. So we're still faced with uncertainty, and we don't have an even distribution on how employers are going to respond. So I feel like it's going to be a challenging modeling exercise and scenario analysis exercise, because it's not a one size fits all come back model. And so playing with that, I think, is going to be really important for us. I feel like we're going to have to model a situation where there's a lot of cars coming back, and maybe a scenario where there's more distribution into suburbs and people can get those electric bikes, and we can see the reinforcement of infrastructure to help make that possible. I am so fascinated by the remarks around the evolution of the space of the office. Being a transportation expert, I work on the evolution of transportation choice. And so you are all talking about how people are going to move away from this cube farm model, which sounds glorious to me. Never a big fan of that, to something that's more like a hotel and an open space. And I was struck by the analogy to what I work on, which is to try to create choice for people in transportation so they don't feel like they're locked into the private vehicle ownership and use model. And I felt like there was this really lovely analogy to what you guys were saying too, is let's not lock people in. Let's not lock an employer into 5 days a week, cube farm. Let's give everybody access. Let's democratize the workplace. And I think what we've been working on for a long time is democratizing mobility, making it more accessible, not leaving anybody behind who isn't able to afford a smartphone or they're underbanked, so that we can provide access to mobility. And so I think this parallel to what's going to happen to the future of work is something that we should try really hard to thread the needles between. And so, Rich, I was really excited when you started using my language around micromobility and people wanting scooters and bikes and these types of things, because that's what I've long been working on, is how do we give people access to choice so that they don't feel like they have to go to work in a private car? And if they're not feeling comfortable sharing a vehicle for whatever reason, are there new form factors? Are there things we can bring in that just reinforces that choice model? So that's sort of how I'm coming about this. Is I'm not sure we have a lot of answers, Hani, beside what we are already doing, which was head scratching on what are the employers going to do. We might have to come back to Rich and Sheila a little bit later, maybe after the fall, after Labor Day, to see if the scenarios are going to shift a bit more. But it seems to me that we need to continue to thread this needle between land use, housing, commercial uses, and transportation, which I'm just continually impressed by the fact that we aren't talking together more often as sectors.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Rich, any closing thoughts for us? What should we be watching in the next few months?
I think that, there's a lot of uncertainty. We will all acknowledge that. The cards being thrown in the air, Sheila's cards thrown in the air is an apt description of what's happening right now. But I would caution against again, overestimating the impact in the short term. We were reflecting on the impacts of 9/11 and in Manhattan, and post 9/11, the way people spoke about office towers is that no one would ever lease office space in the upper edge of a tower ever again. And office towers were gone forever. No one would ever be comfortable there ever again. And we know now, 20 years on, that's not the case. And I think we're going to be looking back and reflecting on this era, maybe with a similar perspective. I think people will get comfortable again once we're out of COVID jail and the vaccinations permeate through the community. That's the hope anyway. I think that is we will be back to normal sooner than we all think.
Thank you, Rich. Sheila, last word to you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Just to build off what Rich has said, and Susan as well, this too shall pass. There will be life after this, but we won't return to normal, right? There is no normal after this. We've already let the cat out of the bag. People already understand that we can work from home or we can work in the office, and it depends on the work that I need to accomplish during the day. And as an empowered employee, I'm quite capable of making that decision myself. And so once you do that and you're cognizant of the war for talent, suddenly the future opens up for employers, for employees, and certainly for the real estate and transportation community. So I don't think we can take our standard traditional paradigms and just forecast those forward. I think there's many different variables that should be considered in your modeling. So I wish you luck on your modeling. Good luck. That'll be very interesting. You throwing the card up in the air scenario will be one of the scenarios, I'm sure.
Well, thank you all very much for this enlightening conversation today. Sheila, Rich will definitely come back to you. Hopefully you'll be willing to continue to share your knowledge with us. Susan, thank you so much for moderating this today, and Brett for organizing and coordinating this event. To our attendees, thank you very much for being with us today. We had some really good questions from the audience today, and also this is being this has been recorded and will be posted to our website. Well, you can find the link if you go to the either the Northwestern University Transportation Center website or the UTC Telemobility UTC website. So thanks again, and have a good weekend.